Bon ben, bonjour, nous sommes heureux de vous accueillir ici pour cette masterclass au nom de Studio Magazine, Mad Movies, la Fnac. Et nous sommes d'autant plus heureux de rencontrer Peter Jackson, que vous attendez tous. Juste une petite question pour commencer. Comme il s'agit d'une masterclass, est-ce qu'on vous a déjà demandé d'enseigner le cinéma?
Never, no. I've never been taught cinema either. So we may all learn something tonight.
Est-ce que vous pensez qu'on apprend mieux le cinéma en regardant des films ou en faisant?
Well, it's both really. I'm sure that I'm always learning by watching other people's films. But just at the same time, every time I make a film, it's like your own film school that you're going through. Hopefully, coming out the other end knowing a little bit more than you did when you started.
J'aurais aimé savoir quels ont été vos premiers désirs de faire des films, puisque vous vouliez au départ faire des effets spéciaux, et comment ce désir d'effets spéciaux s'est transformé en un désir complet de cinéma.
Well, I was very much influenced as a 5 or 6 year old by some things on TV in New Zealand, and this is about 1965, 66. Thunderbirds, Jerry Anderson's Thunderbirds was a huge influence to me at that time. And so I used to make little models, and my parents had a Super 8 movie camera, and I was able to film my models, and I was sort of trying to do little Thunderbirds type disaster scenes in the back garden. And so I really, and then I saw King Kong when I was about 8 or 9, the original King Kong, and that really cemented a sort of a love of special effects, really, because I was blown away by King Kong, but I also knew it obviously wasn't real. And the idea of being able to depict something on film that's not real and yet have you emotionally engaged in what's happening and excited about it and swept away by it was sort of that sort of magic, really, the magic of escapist cinema was what really made me want to become a filmmaker. And then as I was continuing through my teenage years, I'd be making films, again, Super 8 movies at home, just based on special effects, and I did stop motion animation, made dinosaurs out of plasticine. And most of my teenage years, I wanted to do special effects. I thought that was the job that I wanted to do because I loved doing it at home and I loved those types of films. And so I had an ambition to be a stop motion animator for a long time. And it was only when I started to edit films together, because this is the days before videotape, it used to be Super 8, and when I was about 17 or 18, I figured out how you actually edit films by getting a little splicer, and we used to have to chop the Super 8 film up with and glue it back together again in a different order, and it was very primitive sort of way in which, but the idea that you could edit films and then start to change the order of things, and it started to sort of get my mind going on what the possibilities of storytelling and how you could really it was just a slow movement towards the skills that a director obviously has, because I like the idea of storytelling ultimately more than just doing special effects, and so that's really how I sort of got interested in directing. By the time I was about 20, I wanted to direct.
J'aurais aimé savoir en fait comment les premiers films que vous avez faits ont été accueillis, puisque vous avez reçu tout le soutien de la New Zealand Film Commission, alors que vos films étaient particulièrement incorrects au regard de ce qui se faisait à l'époque en Nouvelle-Zélande. Et pourtant, ils n'ont absolument pas hésité à les promouvoir, à les vendre à l'étranger. Enfin, des gens comme Jim Booth et Lindsay Shelton vous ont beaucoup épaulé. Comment une commission aussi respectable a pu promouvoir des films comme Bad Taste, Les Feebles, Branded? Est-ce que c'est vous qui les avez convaincus, ou est-ce qu'ils étaient déjà convaincus de votre talent d'avance?
Yeah, I'll just step back slightly bit earlier than that, to lead up there. When I left school, I was 17 and I couldn't get a job in the film industry in New Zealand. I actually applied for a job at the film unit, which is New Zealand's main laboratory and post-production house, and I got turned down. I actually bought the film unit about 3 years ago, so I own it now. But this is back in 1978, and so there was no job, there was no way for me to break into the film industry, and I kind of always imagined, as I think most people who want to, get into the film industry, that the path to becoming a director would probably take 20 years, and you'd start, you know, sweeping the floor, and you'd slowly work your way through the ranks, as it were, to finally get to direct a film. And I tried to do that by getting a very low-level job at the film unit when I left school. I thought, okay, I'll begin this sort of process to directing. And probably it was lucky I got turned down, because it cut that avenue away. I no longer had that opportunity. So I became a photolithographer at a newspaper, which has nothing to do with filmmaking, but it was an apprenticeship, and I needed to earn some money. So I was a lithographer at this newspaper for 7 years, and during that 7 years I spent all of my income. I was earning, you know, a couple of $100 a week, and I spent all of that on saving up and buying a 16mm camera and starting to make what I thought was a short film, just to basically get to know how the camera worked, because it was quite a complicated a Bolex spring-wound camera, and I'd never really used 16mm before. So I started to make this short film as a way of just testing the camera and figuring things out. And then I'd only be able to shoot on Sundays because I was working full-time at the newspaper, and I'd have to work 6 days a week to earn some overtime to start paying for the developing of this film, because it was very expensive. And this short film that we were making eventually ended up expanding and became the first feature film that I made, called Bad Taste. And with Bad Taste, what I'd done is I'd just over about 3 or 4 years, it was about 3.5 years at that stage, I'd been shooting the short film. And the problem is, every Sunday shooting was great, but during the week I'd just sit there with my job at the newspaper, kind of being bored and thinking of new ideas, so that every time the next weekend rolled around, I had all these new ideas and which to go out and film. And I had all of the actors were just friends of mine from the lithography department. No real actors, just mates of mine. And I dragged them out every Sunday, and this went on for about 3.5 years. And when I finally edited, because I wasn't cutting this film, I was just shooting it, and so because I didn't have any way to cut 16mm, but I eventually rented a sort of editing machine for a week, and I took a week off work, sat down, and I edited all the footage that we had, and it was like over an hour long, an hour and a quarter long. I thought it was only supposed to be 10 minutes. And so I realized at that point that I had a feature film, not a short film really, to have to deal with, and so we did a little bit more shooting and sort of basically finished the filming off. But I'd spent $17,000 of my kind of lithography wages, which is about everything I'd earned over that period. But there was no way I could do the post-production on the film, because post-production is too expensive, way too expensive. It's sort of $200,000, which I could never have afforded. So at that point, I took the Bad Taste as a sort of a rough cut, sort of silent movie, really. It didn't have much soundtrack. And I showed that to the New Zealand Film Commission, and they agreed to give me the money to finish it. And which is how I got them to get involved in Bad Taste. I think the question was, you know, a government agency, a government-funded film commission would never really make a low-budget splatter film. Film commissions don't tend to do that. But in this case, I'm sure they would have said no at any stage early on. But because I'd now virtually finished it, and they could kind of see that it was funny and kind of, you know, it had a sort of entertainment and possibility of selling to the right market, they agreed to finish off the post-production. So it was only because I shot it myself that I ever got to the point that I got money off the Film Commission. You know, if there's a lesson or a bit of advice I'd give to people that want to make films, I mean, I've always done okay out of going around the system, going in through the back door, as it were. I mean, every film commission or funding body or studios or whoever they are that finance films, they all have a sort of a system they have to, and it varies, obviously. They have a procedure, and if you're a young filmmaker, you know, they don't know you, you want to make a film, you want to get money to make a film. I've always had better success kind of going round into the back door rather than trying to approach them head on.
Justement, ça nous amène à la question du culot, puisque, outre le fait de présenter un splatter à la commission, par la suite, plutôt que d'aller à Hollywood, comme beaucoup de réalisateurs tentent de le faire, dès qu'ils ont du succès, va faire venir Hollywood jusqu'à lui. Bref, imposer tout un tas de règles, alors que souvent, au départ, il n'y a rien qu'un rêve de film. Donc comment on convainc des gens qui sont manifestement plus puissants, puisqu'ils ont l'argent, les structures, à investir sur soi et à venir vers soi, comme ça a été le cas sur Fantôme contre Fantôme, évidemment, Le Seigneur des Anneaux.
I mean, every film gets made in a different way, and every film has its own different story, which would be too long to sit here telling tonight. But I mean, one answer I'd give you is that you're always going to have better luck attracting the interest of people if you have something to show them. In the case of Bad Taste, I didn't knock on the film commission saying, I have this vision for this kind of film about aliens that eat people. You know, could you give me some money for it? I went out and I made it. I paid for it myself. I nearly, you know, I spent 3 years, I didn't own a car. I couldn't afford a car because I couldn't have a car and make a film. So I asked my parents to drive me everywhere I needed to go in their car. And I didn't enjoy the luxuries of life at all. I didn't go to parties, didn't travel, didn't do anything. I just sort of single-mindedly made this film and spent every cent I had on it. But at the end of the day, I had a movie that I was able to use as a way of getting it finished, getting the post-production money. I mean, even with The Lord of the Rings, to jump right forward to The Lord of the Rings, you know, we were in a situation where Miramax had funded The Lord of the Rings for 18 months, and then they decided that they didn't want to be involved anymore. And when Bob Shea at New Line saw, you know, we went to meet Bob Shea at New Line to see if they wanted to do The Lord of the Rings. At that point, we had over 2 years worth of pre-production materials that we were able to show Bob, and we had made a 25-minute videotape of everything that we'd done, and we'd built lots of miniatures, and we'd done lots of sketches, and we'd done lots of visual effects tests and computer stuff, and we had the troll, and from the Fellowship of the Ring was sort of there swinging his hammer around, and we had a visual presentation, and I don't think without seeing that stuff, I don't think Bob would have ever been interested in doing it or agreed to do it, but he saw 25 minutes on a videotape that we'd made of all this material that we'd put together, and the visual impact of that probably was the difference. And so I've always found that just don't talk about it, don't ask for anything, don't expect people to give you anything for nothing. Do the work yourself, whether you have to pay for it yourself, whether you have to spend a year, 2 years doing it. If you've got a vision or something you want to do, put together a visual package, whether it's DV film that you've gone out and shot. You know, you want to make a feature film on 35mm, you've got a great idea. Well, shoot the first 20 minutes of it on a DV with some friends of yours just to demonstrate how great it's going to be and excite people, and then they'll give you the money and you can go back and reshoot it all on 35mm. You know what I mean? It's kind of like just do something. It always succeeds a lot better to have something to show.
Et comment vous les avez décidés à faire 3 films et non pas 2 comme vous proposiez d'abord de le faire?
Yeah, I'll tell the story very quickly. I mean, originally when we first conceived the idea of doing Lord of the Rings, we wanted to make 3 movies back to back, and we actually wrote a 90-page treatment was the very first thing we ever wrote, which we gave to Miramax. And the 90-page treatment actually broke into three movies. That was our original goal. And then Miramax they didn't want the risk of doing 3 films at the same time, because the other thing is we wanted to make all 3 at the same time. And the reason, there's actually a very practical reason for that, as to why we wanted to do all 3 at the same time, was the fact that we wanted to release them, well, originally we wanted to release them 6 months apart, do like Christmas, and then do a summer, and then do a Christmas release, so that the whole thing played out quickly. Eventually that became impractical just because of the sheer number of computer shots we have to do for each of them. We couldn't, a year apart was the best we could do. But nonetheless, that was the reasoning. If you made one at a time, then you'd have at least 3 years between each of the films. You'd be waiting 3 years for the next one, because to begin a film from scratch and to go through the whole process and all the effects after you've released the previous one, it would be a 3-year cycle. So we always just wanted these films to be released close together as like an event. But anyway, Miramax didn't want to do 3. They agreed to take the risk on doing 2 back to back. So that's how we proceeded with Miramax for about 18 months and did a lot of work. And then as you're writing the scripts, you can start budgeting. You can't really do much of a budget till the scripts come in, until you know what things you need for the film. And during this 18 months, budgets were being prepared, and it became clear that Miramax couldn't afford ultimately to make 2 films. It was going to be too expensive for them as a company. because they'd never made a very big, expensive film at that time. I mean, Gangs of New York, which they've just finished at the moment, is the most expensive thing they've ever done, and these two were a lot more expensive than that. And so it became, for Miramax, an issue of budget, simply. And their way of solving that was to suggest to us that we collapse the Lord of the Rings into one movie. And I sort of said, well, is this, do we do the first one and then release it, and if it's successful, we go off and do the second? And they said, no, we just want to do one film. You just combine it all, and we don't want it to be longer than 2 hours long. So we were, presented with this concept, a take it or leave it from Harvey, really, Harvey Weinstein, which was really, you're either making a 2-hour Lord of the Rings film or you're not involved. And we said, well, what happens if we're not involved? And Harvey had this whole plan B. He was going to get John Madden to direct the Lord of the Rings, and he was going to get, I forget the guy's name, Hussein Hamani, or a screenwriter that had done The Wings of the Dove anyway, to rewrite the scripts and to make it one. So he had his backup plan. I don't know whether those people actually ever got talked to by Harvey, but Harvey certainly in his mind had this kind of plan B figured out. And it was a take it or leave it, and we decided to leave it and to walk away at that point and not be involved in it anymore, because we didn't want to do Lord of the Rings as 1 2-hour film. So our agent, Ken Cammons, at this point in time phoned Harvey up and said to Harvey, listen, you can't treat Peter and Fran, my partner who wrote this, you can't treat them like this. They've spent 2 years on this project. They brought the idea of doing Lord of the Rings to you in the first place. So you owe them some opportunity here before you go off and make your 2-hour film. And so basically Harvey agreed to give us 4 weeks to try to find somebody else to do it. The catches, the conditions that Harvey put on were within 4 weeks we had to have had somebody agreed to do the 2-film one. He said, well, if somebody agrees to do 1 film, then that's, I'm agreeing to do 1 film, so this other studio has to agree to do the 2 at the budget level that you want to get. He also wanted to be an executive producer on the film, and he wanted all the money that he'd spent at that stage, which was quite a lot of money because we've been doing designs and Weta had been doing a lot of visual effects. It was 2 years worth of pre-production work. All the money had to be paid back to him. So we had 4 weeks. And at the end of 4 weeks, if we hadn't done it, bang, we were out, and he was just going to go off and do his thing. So we were very lucky. I mean, we were very lucky because we had all this great material. We had models that had been made, miniatures. Weta had sculpted maquettes of all the creatures, done sketches, designs. We had a lot of great stuff. Alan Lee and John Howe had been involved for about a year at that point, and they'd done thousands of sketches and paintings. So we decided the best thing to do was to quickly to make a documentary that would use all this visual material, because we couldn't take it in suitcases to Los Angeles and go pitching it to studios with all these models. We had to figure out a way to actually to present them. So I got a crew together. I got Al Bol, who'd shot The Frighteners with me, a great DP in New Zealand. I quickly got him to come up and help, and I got a bunch of people, and we worked for a week to make this 25-minute documentary on the Lord of the Rings in the making, where we're all sitting there looking absolutely terrified and desperate and being interviewed and talking about our vision for it, but trying to look as calm as possible. And we filmed all these maquettes. We put these models, maquettes are like sculptures of the monsters and things, lovely painted sculptures, and we put them on turntables, and we lit them, and we photographed them, and we kind of did all this. I mean, we tried to make it like a real slick kind of presentation. And then, and that was the first week of our 3 weeks was spent doing that. So at the beginning of the second week, we had 3 left now. We set off for Los Angeles, because that's obviously where we had to go from New Zealand to LA to go around and basically to meet studios and to say, listen, we've got this great vision for 2-part Lord of the Rings film, and here it is, and would you watch our videotape, and we'll talk to you about it. And Ken Cammons, our agent, started to set up meetings with every studio in Los Angeles, every filmmaker who might want to executive produce it for us, everyone who was in any position of power. And that was the second week. The third week, while these meetings were being arranged, the third week we got onto an airplane and flew over to LA, landed. At that point, Ken gave us an update, and basically every single studio or potential filmmaker, executive producer that he'd approached, all but 2 of them had passed and didn't even want to meet. Like, they didn't even want to see our tape. I thought, they don't even want to watch it? No. No, they have no interest. And Polygram was one company, and New Line Cinema were the other company that had expressed interest. New Line, there's a guy called Mark Ordesky there who I'd had something to do with about 8 or 9 years earlier, because I'd written a Nightmare on Elm Street script that never got filmed back in about 1990 or something. And I got to know Mark, who was a very junior part of the company at that stage. So I knew somebody there, and Mark was a big Lord of the Rings fan. And so Mark, certainly on behalf of the company, was saying, yeah, we should definitely meet Peter, we should definitely hear about this. And I mean, as a project, I think Lord of the Rings was something that excited him because he was a big fan of it. But we had our meeting with Polygram first, and Polygram really liked the whole thing, and they basically, at the end of it, said, listen, we would say yes to this in a second, but unfortunately we're being sold at the moment. Our company is up for sale, and we could never enter into a project with this size of budget until the sales process was finished. And we'd have to just let that settle down and know who was owning us before we could really do this properly. And that was going to be, months away, and we only had 2 more weeks. So Polygram were immediately out of the picture. New Line were the only hope. And we tried, I don't know if this worked or not, we tried to play a little game where we didn't want New Line to know that they were the only studio left now. So we'd do things like call up Ordesky and say to him, oh, look, that appointment that you wanted us in there at 3 o'clock on Tuesday. Look, we're really sorry, Mark, but look, we've just got this meeting. We've got this really important meeting that we'd prefer to do, and it's really much better if we do this one, and can we reschedule you for the following day? We were trying to sort of generate this feeling that we were so hot now that New Line weren't really going to get much of a chance at this. And so we basically turned up at this meeting at New Line. Shay asked me to come into his office. The first thing that happened, Shay asked me to come into his office, just him and me alone. He pushed everyone else away. Fran was there, and Ken, our agent, was there, and Mark was there, and he just said, you people stay here. I want to talk to Peter alone. And we had our videotape, and he was ready to watch it, but we hadn't seen it yet. And then Bob Shay sort of gave me this little lecture in his office about how they didn't make this Nightmare on Elm Street film with me, but Heavenly Creatures was a film he very much admired, and they'd like to work with me one day. And he said he doesn't think Lord of the Rings is going to be the project, but he just wanted me to know that should New Line turn me down, that the door was always open to me to come with other projects. It was sort of being polite. I mean, he was basically setting me up. I thought he was going to say no, but no meant please consider us for other things, because we do like what you do, which was nice. And then we went into the room, the screening room, with this video, and we sat there and we put it in 25 minutes, and the room was completely silent during this, because Bob was just intently watching it and nobody said a thing. It was just really, really horrible, and just waiting. And it finished, and the lights sort of went up, and he still didn't say anything. And then he said, I'm just trying to remember the exact words. Then he basically said, I don't know why would you want to, because we were obviously pitching the idea of 2 Lord of the Rings films. That was the whole concept. Our 2 Miramax, Part 1 and Part 2. He said, why is it 2 films? Why would you want to do 2 films? Isn't it 3 books? Shouldn't it be 3 movies? And we just nodded and said, yeah. He said, that's a great idea, Bob. You just think you might be interested? And he basically, and I can only say that it was probably that 25-minute video that swung around, because I did get the lecture in the office at the beginning warning me that he probably wasn't going to do it. So that 25-minute documentary is the most important bit of film I ever shot in my life. I mean, I've always liked films that mix sort of fantasy and special effects and larger-than-life stuff with some sort of reality base, some kind of form of emotional sort of grounding. We came up with the Lord of the Rings idea while we were in post-production on The Frighteners. While we were cutting The Frighteners was the first time.
Get off the road! Quick!
This is the first day of the shoot. This is the first thing that we ever shot on Lord of the Rings, on the first day.
Quel souvenir vous gardez de ce premier jour de tournage?
I remember being very excited. I mean, I used to be, when I was younger, I used to be very nervous on the first day of shooting because it was kind of, used to be just terrified. I remember Meet the Feebles. I felt sick because I was so nervous. But I don't. It's not like that anymore. And we'd been in pre-production for 3 years. Because of the whole Miramax episode, which was a lot of work was done, and then we went to New Line and had more pre-production. We'd been working on it for 3 years, and the day that we finally got to shoot our first shot was a very exciting day. I was very, very excited. I was just relieved to be out of pre-production and finally shooting something.
Est-ce qu'en attaquant le Seigneur des Anneaux, vous vous sentiez pas un peu comme Frodon? C'est-à-dire à la fois, vous n'étiez pas sûr de réussir un tel voyage et une telle mission, et en même temps, vous aviez entre les mains le pouvoir de maîtriser le chaos, mais aussi la possibilité de le déclencher.
We were very well prepared. I mean, when we started shooting the Lord of the Rings, because of the 3 years, we had all of our storyboards done. We'd done all of our casting, sets were built. Everything had to be designed for 3 movies, So on that first day of shooting, which was October the 11th, I think it was, 1999, when that scene under the log was shot. At that point in time, we had, all of the Return of the King designed, the miniatures for Minas Tirith, which you guys are not going to see them till next year. We had them built, designed, finished. It was all kind of there. And so we went into this very well prepared. So from that point of view, it was just exciting. I knew it would be exhausting because we shot for 15 months. So I knew it was going to get very, very stressful, very tiring, physically very tiring and draining. I wasn't disappointed, it was.
Bring forth the ring, Frodo.
It is true.
We have hundreds of questions, but I think the fans out there have thousands of them. So maybe we should ask your fans to...
That would be great. I'd love to answer.
Donc, s'il y avait des questions dans le public, vous levez la main, il doit y avoir des micros qui se promènent, je pense.
Bonjour Peter Jackson. Donc j'avais une question à poser par rapport à, après le Seigneur des Anneaux, est-ce que vous avez l'intention d'attaquer une autre œuvre de Tolkien comme Bilbo le Hobbit, ou est-ce que vous arrêtez au Seigneur des Anneaux, ou est-ce que vous avez l'intention de faire une autre adaptation d'une œuvre?
I've got well, I don't think there are any other Tolkien novels that can be worked on. I know The Hobbit, the rights are sort of encumbered, and I've never had a discussion with New Line about The Hobbit. United Artists own Hobbit rights, as well as New Line owns some of them. So I don't know what the reality is of a Hobbit film ever being able to be made, because it would have to be some sort of co-production. The Silmarillion, Christopher Tolkien owns the film rights to that, and he's announced several times that he's never ever going to allow a movie of the Silmarillion or any part of the Silmarillion to be made. So I don't know what the reality is of anything else Tolkien-wise could ever actually be made.
Mais est-ce que vous en auriez envie?
Well, I've got a lot of other things I'd like to do as well. I mean, I haven't thought about it, but to tell you the truth, knowing that Christopher Tolkien doesn't want the Silmarillion to be made, I've never thought about making it. So that's not really entered my kind of my Rolodex in my head as a potential future project. I mean, I do have 3 or 4, 5 projects that Fran and I have got that that one day we'd love to make, and they're all different to Tolkien. They're not Tolkien.
Yeah. Hello, Mr. Jackson.
Hi.
We're really impressed to see you here. I got a little question because I am a young French creator, And I would like to know what do you think about French touch, actually, because you are not in the within the Hollywood system, because you work in another country. And did you work with French artists?
We do have French computer artists working on this film. I know. I'm afraid I could never give you their names. We have about 300 computer artists at Weta in New Zealand who do all the Lord of the Rings CG shots, and of those 300, they're from many different countries in the world. And I know that there are quite a few French computer artists down there who are working on the film. But beyond that, I'm not really sure. I couldn't even tell you what shots they were working on. But we certainly have a United Nations of computer talent from all around the world doing our shots. But I mean, France has always been incredibly kind to me, because just jumping right back to the Bad Taste story again, when the Film Commission funded the completion of Bad Taste, and I was a photo lithographer at a newspaper who had just made a movie. They took me off to the Cannes Film Festival in 1988, I think it was, 88, I think it was. And I know that, Cannes was just such an exciting place, and one of the very first sales that Bad Taste ever made was to France, that somebody here bought it. And I think at that time paid quite a lot of money for it, so it immediately told the New Zealand Film Commission that this was a good investment, and that enabled me to become established. And the first time outside of Cannes that I ever saw one of my movies screened was Bad Taste. Directly after that Cannes Film Festival in 1988, there was a big horror movie festival here in Paris at the Rex, and I was invited to that, and I'd never been to Paris before. I'd never been really outside of the country of New Zealand, and I was sort of suddenly being swept along with this movie that was selling, and it was all very exciting. And I went to, and it was premiered at the Rex. And it's amazing because in a couple of days we have The Two Towers is going to be premiered at the Rex at the same place. So it's come full circle, and it's amazing, a little strange.
Moi, j'aimerais poser une question toute bête à Peter Jackson. C'est avant de débuter le tournage, je voulais savoir s'il avait vu ou s'il s'était inspiré ou tout simplement apprécié un film d'Heroic Fantasy. C'était avant de se lancer dans le sien, genre Conan le Barbare, Willow ou autre. Et si, parce que j'ai vu dans le documentaire sur le DVD qu'il avait été invité à aller voir au Skywalker Ranch avec George Lucas, etc. Si c'était très prudent, sachant les influences du Seigneur des Anneaux dans la trilogie Star Wars, et que George Lucas justement était producteur de Willow, qui est un petit brouillon du Seigneur des Anneaux.
Yeah, I'd certainly seen just about every fantasy film, I think, that came out. I mean, they were the films that I was watching when I was growing up, when I was a teenager, 20s, I saw all that stuff, Conan, Willow, Krull, obviously all the Harryhausen films from earlier. I mean, I loved the Ray Harryhausen films. So, sure, they are the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I just love that type of film. George Lucas and Rick McCallum, his producer, have always been incredibly generous to us. I mean, that a lot of this doesn't really ever get talked about, but because everybody thinks there's some sort of rivalry, which is absolutely not true between, because the only way in which Star Wars would be and Lord of the Rings would be having a rivalry is if we were being released at the same time of the year, but we're not. I mean, and so there's actually just been a lot of help and support. Rick McCallum, who's the producer of the Star Wars films, came down to New Zealand to do some location scouting and to look at the possibility of using New Zealand as a basis for the Attack of the Clones when they were looking at moving out of the London studio, which they'd used for the Phantom Menace. And we met up with them then, and we were talking and this was while we were in pre-production on Lord of the Rings. It must have been 1999, and we were talking to Rick about our pre-visualization, about how we were using computer animatics to try to plan our shots, and he said that they had a whole department doing that for the Star Wars films, and that we'd be welcome to go and visit them, and they'd show us what they were doing, and they had a whole lot of software that they were using and all these different tricks that they had for their pre-visualization. And so a little while later, when we were in Los Angeles doing some casting for Lord of the Rings, we went up to the Lucas Ranch, and we saw all of the animatic stuff that they were doing for Star Wars films. Rick showed us around. They then helped us get the software. They helped us get all of the the sort of the various things that we needed to set up our own department to do the same thing for Lord of the Rings. They were incredibly helpful. And then we were able to return the favour, because when they decided on shooting in Australia, in Sydney, for the Attack of the Clones, Barry Osborne, who is our producer on Lord of the Rings. He'd done The Matrix in Sydney a year or two before, so he was able to help Rick and George set up the crew in Australia and tell them who the good people were to shoot with. So there's just been this, and then as a result of that, they invited us onto the set of Attack of the Clones. They just said, anytime you guys got a break and you want to come over, because it's only a 3-hour flight away from where we were, come over. So there was a period in the middle of the Lord of the Rings shoot where we took a week off to give everyone a rest. And so Elijah Wood and Orlando Bloom and a few of the actors flew over, and I went over and we went to visit the set, and we hung around with George on set, and we chatted to him and talked about all sorts of things. And so there's always just been this really generous kind of flow of information between us, and we're just, we consider ourselves to be friends.
Bonjour Peter Jackson, j'aurais deux petites questions à vous poser. J'aime beaucoup tous les acteurs que vous avez pris dans le film, et particulièrement Christopher Lee. Donc je voudrais savoir qu'est-ce que ça fait d'avoir Christopher Lee sur le tournage. Et une deuxième sur le dernier volet de la saga, savoir s'il reste quelques plans à tourner, où ils en sont.
The Christopher Lee question, it's great. I mean, I always look on it as being one of the perks of the job that I'm doing, that in addition to just doing what I do, which is to make a movie, occasionally you find yourself working with somebody who had a huge, profound impact on you as a child when you were younger, which is kind of amazing. And Christopher Lee certainly falls into that category. I was a huge Hammer horror fan when I was about 12, 13, 14. They used to screen double features of Hammer horror films in the local cinema on a Sunday afternoon, always on a Sunday. And so I used to go and watch them. And one of the Super 8 movies I started to make when I was about 18 was a Hammer horror style film about a vampire hunter. And I shot about an hour of it on Super 8, and I never finished it, and it's not finished, it's just sort of sitting there in bits and pieces. But I shot a lot of it over about a year and a half, and never kind of finished it. But it was a very Hammer style film. And when we were shooting with Lord of the Rings in New Zealand a year or two ago with Christopher, part of me, I thought for a moment, God, wouldn't it be great if at the weekend I got my old Super 8 camera out of the closet and I got him to do a little cameo for me, so I could actually finish that and have Christopher Lee in it and have it be my Hammer movie. But then I never had the courage to ask him. So, but he's very sweet. He's a gentleman, incredibly polite. I've never seen or heard him get angry. He's very patient, and he has the most wonderful stories to tell. And it's been an honor to meet him, because it is like you're working with one of the great legends of a genre which I love. The second part of that question about how much of Lord of the Rings is shot, we basically, the way that it works, the way that we're doing it is that between October 99 and December 2000, we shot everything that we'd written for all 3 films. So if you imagine we'd written 3 screenplays, and during that period of time, everything was shot, the whole lot, everything. And then what we're doing during post-production, because we have a generous post-production period, which we need it because the films are so complicated, but we basically have a year on each film. So last year it was all on Fellowship of the Ring. This year is Two Towers. Next year's Return of the King. And this is, often in the film industry, films finish their shooting and within 9 or 10 or 12 weeks they're in cinemas. Sometimes films have just like a factory line. The year that we spend on our films is a very important year for us, and I think it helps get the films, working how they should work. And one of the things we've built into to our scheduling and our structure and our budgeting is that in May or June of each of these years, we have an ability to get some actors back to New Zealand to do what we call pickup shooting. And what that is that after we've edited a version of the film, so after we've cut together what we shot back in 99 and 2000, we look at what we've got, and you naturally, as you can imagine, you come up with new ideas. You come up with ideas for scenes that you never had back then, things that you didn't think of at the time but make perfect sense today, ways of just improving the film, of giving a character a little bit more depth, of making a story idea a bit clearer, of just new ideas. And so we've on both the Fellowship of the Ring and the Two Towers, we've and I'm sure it'll happen on Return of the King. We've done 3 or 4 weeks of additional shooting as a way of just sort of handcrafting and fine-tuning the movies. We're assuming we're going to do it again next year, but though I haven't finished a cut of the Return of the King yet. So I at this point I don't know what we'd be shooting, but we certainly have the actors kind of penciled in because we assume it'll happen again. So that's kind of what our working method is.
C'était la dernière question et la dernière réponse. Voilà, merci à vous d'être venus.
Moi, je me permets juste de rajouter que pour ceux qui ne l'ont pas encore vu, sur les 2 tours, vous allez halluciner. Donc préparez-vous au choc.
What business does an elf, a man, and a dwarf have in the Ritter Mark? Speak quickly!
We track a band of Urukai, westward across the plain. They have taken 2 of our friends captive.
Look for your friends, but do not trust to hope. It has forsaken these lands.
We're lost. I don't think Gandalf meant for us to come this way.
He didn't mean for a lot of things to happen, Sam.
It cannot be.
I come back to you now, at the turn of the tide. Sauron's forces have begun their attack. He is using Saruman to destroy your people.
They were unarmed. They had no warning.
This is but a taste of the terror that Saruman will unleash. You must fight.
I will not risk open war. Open war is upon you, whether you would risk it or not.
A new power is rising. Its victory is at hand.
It is an army bred for a single purpose, to destroy the world of men.
You must lead the people to Helm's Deep.
By order of the king, the city must empty.
Where is she? The woman who gave you that jewel.
The alliance between men and elves is over. Our time here is ending. Arwen's time is ending. Let her go.
Where is it?
Just tie him up and leave him. No!
You know the way to Mordor.
There will be no dawn for men.
It's the ring.
Frodo!
It's taken hold of you.
You have the gift of foresight. Tell me what you have seen.
He is not coming back.
The defenses have to hold.
They will hold.
There is nothing for you here, only death.
There is still hope.
Thank you very much. It's been really enjoyable. Thank you.